Yeah, let's do this.
All right. And you want to start us off?
Sure. Well, welcome everyone to our July virtual meetup. Here we are again on Zoom. We appreciate you spending your time.
And we'll get started on YouTube.
Yes. Are we all good with live streaming, Chris? Cool. Again, welcome everyone, and thank you for spending your time after a long day in front of your computer with us. You can expect more of these events as long as they continue to be helpful to you, and hopefully this is a moment for us all to connect. You're here today for a real treat from our friends at Big Duck. This is building your nonprofit's communications engine, and later we'll introduce our speakers. But we are your co-organizers for the N10 local chapter, 501techNYC. My name is Anne. I am the technical creative director at Whole Whale. And Chris, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Chris Tuttle. I'm a principal consultant at Tuttle Co. We're a digital strategy agency here in New York City, and I'm one of the co-organizers of 501 Tech.
Joe, you're up.
Hi, I'm Joe Moran. I'm the Director of Content Operations at the Michael J. Fox Foundation, and I just launched our project management office.
Congrats. My name's Brianna Collins. I'm one of your other co-organizers. I'm currently an independent consultant working on creative strategy with a range of nonprofit organizations.
And that's us. Next slide, please.
Yes.
We want to thank all of our sponsors. We were just waxing nostalgic about Civic Hall, which is our normal event space when we can all be in person and see each other and eat food together. You can find them at civichall.org and at Civic Hall. And we also really want to thank Whole Whale, in addition to Anne, the lovely Anne, being part of Whole Whale. They are a sponsor for us, and they've been for a while. Anne, do you want to talk a little bit about what Whole Whale does?
Sure, I'll be quick. We are a digital agency working with nonprofits on data and tech, and we really miss being in person with you all at NTC, so we try to support the local meetups as much as we can.
Alrighty. And we also want to thank Tuttle Co. for being our webinar host. It's convenient to have Chris in both places here with us and also hosting our webinar.
And we have a vibrant, growing Facebook group. If you haven't joined, here is the link. Go check it out. And you can request to become a member, and then the conversations are happening there. You can ask questions as well. Of course, there's also an N10 forum.
You can also find out about upcoming events both in New York City and virtually around the country right now. I see a few people in our chat from Texas and other places. Welcome, welcome. We're so excited to have you here. You can also check out other nonprofit tech clubs online, bit.ly/501techNYC, and that'll take you to our local chapter, but you can also from there explore other local chapters who have virtual events going on.
And while we plan ahead for upcoming virtual events, you should check out N10's upcoming courses and events that might be of interest to you. N10 is still hard at work producing courses for folks like you all.
Tonight, we're very, very excited to have Sarah Durham from Big Duck talking about her book, Building Your Nonprofit's Communication Engine. So without further ado, we want to hand it over to Sarah. And just as a reminder to everybody, if you have questions, there will be a Q&A towards the end, but if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box down at the bottom of your screen, rather than just in the chat, so we know kind of where to focus our attention. So if you see a Q&A, like 2 little speech bubbles there, that's where you want to put your questions for Sarah. And if you just want to say hi to people, you can put that in the chat. So thanks so much.
All right. So thank you all for having me, and thank you everybody who's logged in for spending what has probably been a long day on Zoom with us and spending a little bit more time on Zoom. Some of you know my fearless colleague, Farrah. trumpeter. You're going to see her again in a minute. She's gonna join me after I go through some content and share it with you, and she'll be facilitating some conversations and questions we have. Just a little bit of introduction and housekeeping before I dig in. What I'm going to share tonight is an overview of some of the concepts in my new book, The Nonprofit Communications Engine. And for those of you who don't know me, I founded Big Duck in 1994, and I'm Big Duck's CEO. And last year, I took over a second agency called Advomatic, which builds and supports websites in Drupal and WordPress for nonprofits. So I work in both Big Duck and Advomatic. And through those two positions, I get this really interesting vantage point into the nonprofit sector and into the digital world, the branding world, the world of campaigning, trying to raise awareness, trying to engage people. And so what I'm going to share with you and what's in this book is kind of a consolidation of a long journey, a bunch of research that went into the book, you know, very proactively at the beginning doing the research, but then also a lot of things that have come up through experience. So what I think I'm going to do is I think I'll stop my video for now just to give you a bigger screen view. I'll turn my camera back on at the end with Farrah when we get to Q&A. And I think people have already said this, but don't hesitate to chat in questions and things along the way, and Farrah will help us like cue that up. Also, I'd love to hear your stories and what is meaningful for you and your organization's communications, because I think it's really great to learn from each other. So, so first, why did I write this book? Why did I think this book needed to come into existence? It's because, as I'm sure you have all experienced, if you ask 10 different people what nonprofit communications is as a field or as a discipline, you get 10 different answers. You might even get 10 different answers within the same organization. And it seemed to me that there was no framework or methodology that we could use sort of sector-wide that was scalable, that worked for organizations big and small, and worked across different types of missions, that was useful to help people within organizations, and particularly to help leaders of organizations get clear about what communications as a function should be and can be in an organization. So I kind of set out to try to define that in this book. And the book's on Amazon, but what I'm going to try to do today is give you kind of a cheat sheet to it. Spare you the horror of having to buy the book. And this is actually one of 4 sort of chunks of content about this, and we can share with you some pre-recorded videos and other content as we go. So first, what does nonprofit communications mean? What's it all about? Well, this is our definition. Nonprofit communications is the practice of creating and sustaining mindshare and engagement that advances the mission. So a practice like yoga, like eating well, like getting a good night's sleep is something you have to keep working at. And creating and sustaining mindshare is about visibility and awareness, but visibility and awareness is only as useful as it is driving action. And that's where the engagement comes in. If you're not engaging people and getting them to take some sort of action that advances the mission, really what's the point? So, so in my research and in the work we do at Big Duck and Advomatic, I've spent a lot of time thinking about why some communications teams seem to be successful and others struggle. What are the ones who are successful doing? What's the outcome that they're generating? And there seem to be 3 outcomes that are most common in a nonprofit environment that has a successful communications engine. The first, and by far the biggest, is engagement, that those great communicators have made it so that the right people know, remember, and connect with your organization and its work, and that people are taking meaningful action on its behalf. A week or so ago, I gave a webinar with Joe Coakley, who heads up ACLU's digital campaigns. And, you know, his team is just building this kind of, you know, powerhouse full of momentum that engages people. And that's what successful communications looks like at its core. That's probably 75% of what a great communications team can achieve. But secondly, a great communications team helps your organization's voice be clear, credible, compelling, and consistent at all points of contact. If any of you are familiar with Big Duck, You probably know this is a lot of what we do at Big Duck is help organizations develop the assets they need, but it is the function of a communications engine, the in-house team, that really uses those assets and makes sure that everyone is on message and that it's all coming together. And the last outcome that a great communications engine can support is I call sustainable momentum, which is a little jargony, but it's basically the idea that the communications in the organization have a rhythm, have a pace, and have sustainability that isn't dependent on one person. Sometimes in an organization you see everything is hanging on the ED. Sometimes you see everything hanging on that one communications person who is the only person who knows how to do certain things. And that's not great. We want to make sure that in your organization, whether people leave or take a break or whatever, that communications is consistent and powerful. So today what we're really going to talk about is the engagement piece, because this is by far the biggest slice of the pie. And you might remember from my definition that nonprofit communications is the practice of creating and sustaining mindshare and engagement. I use this kind of new-ish or less familiar term, mindshare. So let's start by unpacking that a bit. I think if I had a book for every time I had heard this, why are we a best kept secret? Our organization is a hidden gem. I would probably be, driving a fancier car today. And this is Mindshare is the answer to this question. Why are you a best kept secret? Because you have not been able to successfully generate mindshare. So mindshare is the level of awareness and understanding that a product, program, service, or organization has in people's minds. And sometimes something or an organization has mindshare, people are aware of you, they still might not get it right. They might not know exactly what you do. There are a lot of organizations that we remember their names, we've heard of them before, but we couldn't necessarily say what they do. That's where positioning, which is brand strategy, comes in. But mindshare is really important. And it is the job of the communications team to keep it alive. And as I dug into this concept, one of the things that became apparent to me is that mindshare has a shelf life that, over time, if you don't keep plugging away at it and keep doing things that keep your organization top of mind, it starts to slide. That people, if for instance, tonight you participate in this conversation, this concept is going to be very top of mind, and maybe tomorrow it'll be very top of mind. But in a week, in 2 weeks, in a month, in 3 months, if you don't keep having these concepts put in front of you, if you don't keep talking about them or thinking about them, it's going to slip over to the right side. And so the job of the communications team is to make sure that they are constantly chumming the waters and maintaining mindshare so that people who should know your work don't forget about it. One of the things we sometimes do in our work at Big Duck is we help our clients build stronger communications teams. And a piece of that can be helping the people in communications or in development write kind of a mission statement for their department. And one of our clients ended up crafting this mission statement, which I love because it really speaks to the idea of mindshare, that the mission of communications is to explode our base of support and make those people love us. You've got to build mindshare if you're going to no longer be a best kept secret and explode your base of support. The other part of this is about engagement. And engagement means getting people to take actions that advance the mission. It's not enough for them to have heard about you. They have to actually do something. And this is where the communications people have to have a really, really successful and collaborative relationship with their colleagues in other departments, because the type of engagement that's going to drive action isn't going to be random. It's going to be in service of development or in service of programs or in service of advocacy. It's about moving people up a ladder of engagement where the communications people are using owned, earned, and paid media like social media, like email, like PR, to reach people who might be unaware and get them to get interested, get them to lurk, get them to come to the website. But they have to be working very synchronously with people in departments like development and programs, because those people are often generating what is ultimately the request, the ask, or the action that we want people to take. So there's got to be a lot of overlap and a lot of collaboration between the communicators and the other teams. And actually, this is something, if we have time later, it would be interesting to hear from you about the types of collaborations you have with your colleagues in different departments that are most successful. So what's a hallmark of smart engagement? Well, certainly having a clear and compelling organizational strategy. If your organization isn't clear what it's about and where it's heading, it's really hard to drive engagement because you don't know who you're trying to reach. And it's very hard to be strategic in who you're reaching and what actions you want them to take without all of that. I'm going to move pretty quickly here because you're probably mostly a bunch of New Yorkers like me who can handle it. And I want to make sure to leave time at the end, but this is a slide we could come back to if people want to unpack it a bit more. So, in the book, the Nonprofit Communications Engine, the sort of structure of the book is I begin by laying out these 3 outcomes that a communications engine can achieve, and then define 6 core elements that are necessary in order to achieve those outcomes. So what I'm going to do in the next couple of slides is I'm going to take you through those 6 elements and particularly how they are used to create and sustain mindshare and engagement, because that's our focus today. So the 6 elements that power a successful communication outcome is first and foremost strategy. That drives everything. On the right, team and culture. These are elements that are about people, both who those people are in your organization's communications team or functions, and also the culture in your organization generally that maybe facilitates great communication or makes great communication challenging. On the left, tools and processes are kind of the tools or the things that those people can use. And we'll unpack all of these a bit more. Reflection is about how we learn, how we grow, how we use data, how we take all the lessons that emerge and put them to better use. So how do we build a mindshare and engagement platform? Well, we've got to start with a strategy anchored in an understanding of your audiences, the actions you want them to take, and what's in it for them. I mean, this sort of, it feels sometimes like this should go without saying, but it is unfortunately the case that as communicators, so much of the work that people do is day-to-day tactics that eat up a lot of time. So it's very easy to get swept up in the tactics of getting out the newsletter or managing the social account or responding to something that's going on in your organization and lose sight of like, why are we doing this? Who are we trying to reach? What do we want those people to do? So the goal is to always be clear, about those things and to start first and foremost with a lot of clarity about who your audiences are. So this is one of the illustrations in the book, and I sometimes encourage people to do this just on your own, like draw the bullseyes. Who must you engage with? Who should you engage with, and who could you engage with? One of the things I've heard a few times, I'm sure you have too, is people who say, well, we want everybody to know us. We want to be a household name as an organization. Well, that's great if you have the capacity to reach and engage a very wide audience. But before you try to reach everybody, start by reaching your base. Start by being really clear who's at the center, and who's at the center from a fundraising point of view, who's at the center from a programs point of view, who's at the center from an advocacy or activism point of view. There might be multiple people at the center, and then ring them out, because if you've got limited time and limited money, you want to focus it strategically on the center. It's also a great best practice that I always encourage people to do, to write a brief that defines your audience engagement goals, objectives, strategies, and tactics before you start communicating. And this is a step that takes a little bit of time, and so sometimes people tend to skip over it, but it's really well worth doing, because it'll just help give you something you can keep coming back to and saying, okay, is this really, are we actually doing what we set out to do? There's a resource that Big Duck has for this. It's actually, I think, our most popular ebook ever. It's called Putting Strategy to Work for Your Nonprofit, and it breaks down like a real definition of goals, strategy, objective, tactics, and gives you some worksheets that are helpful. I'm sure Farrah will chat that out. And the brief that you write can be really simple. It doesn't have to be pages and pages. It can be as simple as a sentence. So before you embark on a new engagement campaign, ask yourself to fill in this question or get on the same page with your colleagues about this question. We want to reach X audience, get them to take Y action, and we will know we were successful if whatever occurs, something measurable in a specific time frame. So for example, we will acquire 400 new members this year. We will increase support from our mid-level donors by 10% this year. We will get 1,500 people to sign our pledge this month. Those are pretty specific objectives that you can use to really measure, are you making progress? And that will also give you a way to pressure test ideas that come up. If somebody walks into your office with a new idea, you can say, okay, is this really going to help us acquire 400 new members this year? Is it worth the effort for the outcome we'd achieve? With that strategy as backdrop, you can start to design finite and evergreen mindshare and engagement campaigns. So what are we talking about when we talk about a campaign? Well, really what we're talking about is weaving together a story with something in a way that is meaningful to the people you're trying to reach, with your audiences in mind. So this is a couple of examples. This is from a body of work that we did a few years ago at Big Duck, which was targeting teenagers and trying to help them connect with summer programs, particularly for Jewish teens in the New York City area. And so instead of just having like a, hey, find programs here, kind of organization-centric story, what we uncovered when we talked to teens was that they were trying to find their summer, look for what was going to make it most meaningful. So find your summer became a theme that could be woven into all kinds of elements, from a website to email, etc. This is a dynamic video that I'm not going to play now, but Farrah will chat out probably a case study for this. Yote Apoyo is an abortion advocacy awareness and support project we work on. So rather than just say like, hey, abortion's a good thing, we are trying to get people to be supportive, be allies for people in their families that have had abortions, and by saying, I support you, which is really person to person. Oftentimes in fundraising, we see organizations do case statements or case for support documents. And that's another place you can weave a theme or a campaign or some other kind of narrative into the story to make it more meaningful. So as you're thinking about your campaigns, an evergreen campaign is the kind of campaign that you might do on an ongoing basis. It might year over year or seasonally or on an ongoing basis keep coming back, because it's always effective at recruiting people, always effective at converting people or getting them to take some action on your website. Or you might have finite campaigns that only have a short shelf life because they are tied to a unique or timely event. A lot of organizations are doing COVID-specific campaigns right now. That's an example of a finite campaign. But a great campaign marries what the individual you're trying to reach wants or is interested in with what your organization is trying to express. And with that, the last sort of step of the strategy is to turn your plan into a calendar with clear accountabilities so that there's no confusion in your organization who's doing what. As you bring this campaign to life. The team aspect is the second element in the nonprofit communication engine. And where I actually have a whole other bit of content about this. We have an ebook about this, but where we see a lot of organizations struggling here is to sort of get clear on who should do what when it comes to building a sort of an engagement machine. So there are a lot of pieces that have to happen in order to do the work that I just outlined. You've got to set all that strategy, the plans, the calendars. You've got to project manage it, make sure it's all happening, coordinate the right people to review, approve, update, buy into it, make all the stuff, track all the stuff, make sure you learn all the stuff, etc. The three things that I have bolded here are the things that are, in my opinion, really almost impossible to outsource or problematic sometimes to outsource. Sure, you can work with a lot of agencies or freelancers or volunteers who can do a lot of these things. But ultimately, it's usually important for there to be somebody in-house in your organization with great project management skills and great collaborative relationship skills who can help coordinate it and make sure the right people are involved in the right ways throughout. I can't see the chat, but it's quite possible that Farrah has already chatted out a link. We have an ebook about teams and how to structure them that goes into a lot more detail about this. Culture is the third element in the nonprofit communications engine. And in terms of how this works with engagement, this is a lot about how you as a communicator and your colleagues in other departments really get along and are able to share your goals. And really what's important is that you can implement your plan and capture lessons and data along the way in ways that everybody feels good about, that are useful for, let's say, the development team, if you're working collaboratively with them, just as much as they're useful for communications. And what we often see is that one of the great barriers to building a successful communications engine is an organizational culture that reinforces silos or a lack of communication, or perhaps marginalizes communications people by treating them just as tacticians who might not have a lot of strategic input or a lot of strategic ideas. That's very often not the case. We've seen brilliant strategy come out of the communications team, but if the culture of the organization minimizes that, that will be a barrier towards engagement. So of course, to do all of this work, you have to have people, elements, content, media, campaigns, software, and other resources. And I know N10 is a great resource for a lot of these things, in 501 Tech also. You've done a lot of different capacity building around this with a lot of different speakers. I find it helpful to kind of distill it down into 3 types of media. I think sometimes people get so overwhelmed by all the stuff they could do or could use or could create that they don't know where to start. So I would encourage you, if you're struggling with that, to think about owned, earned, and paid media. Owned are the things you control. Earned is where you get press or coverage. And paid is when you buy ads, keywords, etc., the things you pay for. And a lot of organizations are probably weighted towards owned media. My experience has been that advocacy organizations tend to rely more heavily on earned media than many other types of organizations do. And paid really varies and tends to be more dominant as you get into larger organizations with bigger budgets. So common mind share and engagement tactics. I mean, you all know these things. You do these things probably all the time. And there are many, many, many tactics that we use as communicators. So let's talk about processes. You know, processes are not always thought about or elevated in a communications team, but they're really important because what they do is they help us capture written workflows or checklists that make sure that we achieve consistent outcomes. And it's basically about writing things down as you go so that you codify how to do things. Write down step by step. You know, how do you do that e-newsletter that you do regularly? Where do you have to log in? Where's the template? How do you set these things up? A lot of people skip that step because it's a little bit of housekeeping or work, but it's so valuable for a number of reasons. The first is that if you're ever not there to do it, it gives somebody else a guide to step in, which will be probably a huge time saver and support for them. But also it gives you the opportunity to optimize what you're doing, because every time you do something over and over again, you learn and you grow. And if you capture that in a checklist or in writing, your odds of remembering it, retaining it, and making your process even better in the future just go up. So as you're working on your engagement programs, I recommend that you check in along the way to assess it and to, you know, tweak things, to refine your strategy, refine your plans, and capture that in writing so that you've got a kind of a learning document. One of the great resources for thinking about processes is Atul Gawande's book, The Checklist Manifesto, which talks a lot about simple checklists and how essential they are in fields like piloting airplanes or in the medical profession, where having a checklist that reminds doctors and nurses to wash their hands when they scrub in has profound impact on health outcomes. The last of the 6 elements in the communications engine is reflection. And what this is about is consistently gathering the data and the insights that your team can glean in order to get smarter and to communicate more effectively. And one of the simplest and easiest ways to do that is just to debrief at the end of a project. So it might be that if you've done something that has tangible data, like click-throughs or website conversions or form completions or dollars raised or people who've signed up, you've got something quantitative. But it might also be that some of the lessons are more qualitative, that they are people's experiences or how, feedback you got from your target audiences about something you did. And when you take the moment to share that and debrief, you'll find that there are patterns that begin to emerge, lessons you start to see or learn in the data, in the insights that again can help you refine your process. So what does it look like when you put it all together? Well, there are lots and lots of great campaigns examples out there. I've chosen to do one that I like from the Big Duck Archive. It's for an organization called Math for America. And what was interesting about this campaign was that this was an organization that was trying to reach public school math and science teachers in New York City and invite them into a program where it's sort of like a fellowship, sort of like a cohort, where they'd get all kinds of professional development, capacity building. And it seemed like a great thing, but they didn't have the numbers that they wanted for this program. Not enough teachers were applying to be in this program. And so, so we did a bunch of research. We had focus groups and interviews and surveys where we talked to public school math and science teachers about their lives, their professions, what they were looking for in this program. We talked to people who'd been in the program. And from that, we were able to start to get a sense of what really motivated them, what they would want from this program. That's sort of the first question you have to ask is, what's in it for them? What's in it for the people you're trying to reach? You know what's in it for you organizationally, but what's in it for them? And what emerged was this idea that teachers want to practice what they teach. In other words, they should learn too. They should grow, and they want to learn and grow and become better teachers, more skilled at teaching. And we generated a bunch of concepts. This is the one we tested most successfully, that the target audiences found most resonant. And then we had photo shoots with real New York City public school math and science teachers. And these ads ran, they ran on the subway, they ran in all kinds of some paid media. There were, brochures that were distributed in school environments, website updates, etc. So sort of taking this theme of practice what you teach and rolling it out across all of the different channels and tools they use. And that wasn't just the communication stuff. It was also things like looking at the forms that the teachers had to fill out to apply to be a part of this program, and how could that form be optimized or made faster. So there are a lot of ways you can take an engagement strategy and bring it to life. It's not just about the tangible stuff that communicators make. It's also about making the experience that your target audiences have faster, smoother, and simpler. So before we hand it over to Farrah and we start doing some questions, I just want to share a couple of things that we get asked a lot. And I also want to encourage you to chat in, because we're going to pivot into discussion pretty soon. So we get asked questions a lot like, well, what if my board members think we should be on TikTok? Or, years ago it was the board member who called up and said, like, we need to be on Twitter, without really understanding if Twitter, was relevant for your organization, 10 years ago. And there is often, I think, a challenge for communicators to respond reactively to new channels and tools or new tactics that emerge. And we always bring this question back to the fundamental strategy question, which is, well, who's on TikTok? Who are the audiences that you could reach if your target audience are on TikTok, are using it, and are going to be able to connect with you there in meaningful ways, maybe you should be on TikTok. But just because everybody else is there doesn't necessarily mean it's an appropriate channel or tool for your organization. So you have to pressure test every new idea against your communication strategy. What if you have no dedicated people who do this stuff? You know, a lot of people are working in organizations where it's the development team who manages communications, or maybe the programs team, or maybe people in operations. And that can be great too. We've seen very, very successful communications projects and engagement campaigns emerge from teams that are either merged, where the communicators and other people are in one department, or really led by people who have no formal training in communications. So the most important thing is that somebody is accountable and responsible for doing the work, not necessarily that you have a dedicated team, dedicated department. So yeah, I already have said this. Let's see, there's a bunch of resources here from Big Duck. I think Farrah's probably been sharing them as we go, but I want to just flag a couple of things before I stop sharing and we turn our cameras back on. The first is that at the beginning of the book, there is a self-assessment. There's a kind of a tool you can use as you read the book to grade yourself and to assess how your organization's communications engine is doing and identify its strengths, and maybe identify the areas that you want to focus on shoring up first if you feel like you've got some room to grow. We converted that assessment into just a one-pager that's a PDF. And so you can download that. And one of the things we've heard from some people is helpful is to go through that and do that self-assessment, maybe with different people in your organization, and share the results and see. There's the book, which is on Amazon, and also I host, and Farrah is a regular guest on the Smart Communications podcast, which is a podcast we produce that comes out every other week, and it is specifically about nonprofit communications, and each episode is 10 or so minutes. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'll turn on my camera and invite Farrah to do that too. And let's chat. Let's see what we got. You're muted, I think, Farrah.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Chief Growth Officer at Big Duck. I've had the pleasure of working alongside Sarah for over 13 years. I am also a very proud board member of N10 and a former co-organizer of this mighty group. So it's lovely to be with you all tonight. And I am just going to help facilitate questions. So we've got two that have been chatted to me, one that's in the Q&A, and I will jump in and ask those. But if anyone has other questions, please definitely feel free to chat them in. So Sarah, we're getting a few questions about Mindshare. I think that that idea makes sense once it's defined, but it's often a new phrase for folks to think about. So the first question comes from Andrea. Do you recommend segmenting our Mindshare approach? We always run into having to narrate differently to different audiences in development. Is segmentation the same for Mindshare?
That's a great question. I think segmentation is a critical strategy for many organizations, because you probably have lots of different stakeholders with very different experiences, very different relationships to your work. Oftentimes what I recommend is that if you've never done messaging, if you've never defined the organization's, fundamental voice, start with something that is broad and a little bit one size fits all, because it can be challenging to jump right into segmenting. But certainly with campaigns, most campaigns are targeting a specific audience and trying to get them to take a specific action. So segmenting is key to that. So yeah, I think there's general Mindshare you can build, and then there's specific Mindshare with specific audiences that's more targeting them to take a specific action. Farrah, what would you say? Do you want to add to that?
Well, I was thinking like, a flavor of positioning, which we talk a lot about in our brand raising or branding work. Positioning is really kind of the big idea or the single idea you want in people's minds about you. So there's clearly a connection. And if, that's usually an immediate association, it's a few words, the best organization to support nonprofits at the intersection of technology and racial equity. That might be a variation of N10's positioning, since N10 is our host here. But for a funder or for someone who works in nonprofits, there may be a variation of that, right? The best organization to invest in, the best organization to go to for professional development in X, right? So it might be segmenting, building off that idea and creating that relationship you have with the different individuals.
Yeah, but don't let segmentation become an excuse for people to not adopt what you're doing or to not do it, because the perfect is the enemy of the good, right? So I think doing something that is the best you can do, even if those segments are like broader than you might ultimately want them to be, that's probably a good place to start.
The next question from our friend Anne, and this comes up a lot also, the nonprofit communications engine is thinking about communications holistically, but with voice as one of the elements. I think there's a clear overlap with branding, and this question comes up around our branding work a lot too, which is how do you measure increase in mind share over time?
Yeah, that is something that we've been thinking about for years and working on for years, and for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, we actually had a tool we created at Big Duck that we called the Brand Raising Benchmark. And it had a feature in it, which was about tracking mindshare over time. The simplest way I know to track mindshare over time is to figure out a way to poll your target audience about their awareness. So when we did the Brand Raising Benchmark, we were using omnibus polling. So we were polling either the general public in an area like New York, or we were targeting specific people who might, you could drill down and say, we're gonna target in this poll people who identify as progressive, or people who identify with a particular religion or something like that. And then you have to ask them a question like, have you ever heard of this organization? And what is your depth of knowledge about the organization? When we did the benchmark, the question was, they had I think an array of 4 different answers that were about measuring how much awareness they had. What we did with the benchmark was we tracked that over time. So if you ask the same people the same question about their familiarity with your issue or your organization, and you keep asking them that question once a year, once every 6 months, once every 2 years, you begin to start to track mindshare. You begin to be able to say, oh, we did this campaign and our mindshare went up, or we didn't do a campaign because our budget got cut and our mindshare went down. But what you really need is the consistent question that over time you keep coming back to, because it's the change that's most significant. The answer to the question you get isn't always, we found people often will say they've heard of something because they think they've heard of it when they actually haven't. So you have to take it with a grain of salt and just track the growth or the drop.
Yeah. This is a question from Ted and related to teams, the teams element of the 6 kind of elements of the communications engine. Is it more important to hire staff, or should we hire agencies to manage aspects of our communications work?
I think there's some things you should definitely have staff for, and some things that are better to outsource. The day-to-day project management, coordination, keeping things moving, getting the right people involved, collaborating, all that kind of stuff is really, I think, important to do in-house. No, there is no agency who is ever going to know your content or your culture or your politics like an insider knows those things. The best place to use an agency, in my opinion, is for things that require real depth of expertise that a staff person is not likely to have in-house. So, for instance, at Big Duck, when we do a brand development process for an organization, we do dozens of those every year and have for 25 years. That's a lot more experience in terms of what can go well, what can go wrong, how to manage the process than an in-house person is likely to have. Same thing with building a website. You'd want to outsource building a website because a web development firm has seen that movie over and over again, knows how to manage the process for optimal long-term success. So with those long shelf life, expensive, high ROI things where you need to get people to buy in, using an external expert is going to be probably a better way to go. But for day-to-day stuff, for, you know, really keeping the engine humming every day, I think it's really hard to replace staff. Sometimes staff are volunteers. Sometimes they are people who take off their hat as a board member and put on the hat as, you know, as a social media implementer. You know, there can be a lot of different roles that people play, and they don't have to be paid staff.
I think the team's dynamic is getting lots of good questions. We've got one from Norman, speaking of buy-in. How do you build a culture where all staff are encouraged to share in communications outreach, not just those who work for communications and marketing? And that's a great question, Norman. We get that a lot.
Yeah, you know, the culture piece is tricky. When I was researching for this book, what kept coming up is that ultimately the culture around communications is very much set by leadership. And if your executive director, if your leadership team is, you know, if communications has a seat at the table, like there is a C-suite communications person, or the communications people are invited into key meetings to share their opinions, or to listen to what's going on, or to help translate something that's important into an internal or an external communication. Organizations that do that tend to have healthier cultures of communications. We saw probably about 5 or 6 years ago, we saw the rise of the embedding model with communications, where we saw communications in larger organizations, we saw communications people being kind of embedded in other departments or other meetings to disperse communications people so that they were where the meetings were happening. And that's a nice model too, because it means that those communicators kind of get their, you know, their hands in the soil a little bit. But if ultimately the way those meetings are run or led doesn't encourage those people to share their ideas or contribute, that shuts it down too. So I think a really good way to shift the culture is to have communications people and the executive director or the C-suite team first have a shared agreement about what communications is and does for the organization. That's one of the reasons I wrote this book, is to have literally something you could assess and talk about and say, what are we doing? How are we doing? Are we on the same page about what we're trying to do? Are we on the same page about what we need to change here? And until you get on the same page with your leadership about those things, it's going to be very hard to shift the culture. But once you're on the same page, it'll be a lot easier for you to identify places where maybe there is a tension or a disconnect, or people are not working collaboratively. Farrah, what would you add?
Yeah, I would just add in, I think this is where trust is a two-way street. And I think I've worked with some comms folks who've held the keys very close to heart and haven't wanted to collaborate. We had worked with one organization who the brand guide was kept with one person on staff and never shared beyond that. And I think if you want to have the whole staff see communications as part of their job, you have to give them the tools, you have to give them the training, you have to show them how, when they actually shared that message for you on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or wherever it was, the results it led to, and really help them be part of the planning as well. So it's not just about, hey, invite communications to the table, but also communications engaging with the other departments as well. So I just add that point. We've got some good questions coming in. Sarah, from Joe, what's your recommendation for working with teams who have a difficult time identifying clear, measurable objectives, particularly when the goal is stewardship or thought leadership?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to ask the question, what is the stewardship or thought leadership in service of, right? Like, if you steward successfully, if you have successful thought leadership, what does that achieve? So for instance, with stewardship, if we're talking about stewarding donors, what I think we're really talking about is maintaining mindshare with donors so that they continue to want to support the organization. And so the metric there is probably something around retention. It's probably around, like, the metric you might have for stewardship. It, you know, could have a high bar, like a certain percentage of retention or renewal, or getting donors to become sustaining donors and giving monthly. Those would all be objectives I think you could set that might emerge out of the the strategy. Stewardship is a strategy, right? And with thought leadership, similarly, the point of thought leadership is Mindshare, and great thought leadership, particularly if you are producing a lot of content on your website or in other places, you get a natural, get an organic search lift from that. You turn up in important conversations. That helps increase your visibility at the bottom of the ladder of engagement. It helps people who are unaware of you become aware of you. So one of the metrics you might use for thought leadership would be conversions, new people who've signed up for your newsletter or subscribed to the blog, or taken some other, signed up for your e-news, taken some other action that shows that they've gone from being on the outside to actually raising their hand and telling you they're there.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think one of the questions we often ask when we're first starting to talk to organizations, I think is a great one, Joe and others who've dealt with this, to ask is what we call the desired future state. Where do you want to see our organization in 3 years or 5 years? So if they say, well, our goal is thought leadership, great. Okay, so let's say we have established that thought leadership you're thinking about in 2025. What does that look like? And as they paint that picture, then maybe you can start figuring out, okay, well, how would we measure that incremental success on our way to getting there? So that can sometimes be a helpful question when folks get mired in jargon or big terms, to get them to paint really where are we going? And then we can say, okay, what's those mile markers to know we've actually made that progress? And that can then help define the objectives. Sarah, we got one from Chris, who was lucky enough to get an advanced copy of the book. So I know he has read it, and he noted that he found it very helpful. And he's curious about what do you think's changed since you wrote the book? Because we published the book in January, and it was written a little bit before then. Given COVID, given the economy, given this renewed attention on racial inequality, what would you change or add if you were writing the book now, or we were a month away from publishing and 2020 happened?
Yeah, I've thought about that a little bit, and one of the things that I felt was really important to do as I was trying to develop the model or the framework for this book was I wanted to create something that would withstand the test of time and would be flexible, like that would work just as well for a small all-volunteer organization or a huge multinational organization, or in human services, or in social justice, or across fields. So the basic framework of the 3 outcomes and the 6 elements that make up those outcomes, I think still holds up. And it's been interesting in the last few months. I had planned to do talks like this pre-COVID. And as things started to change and those things all became virtual, I found actually more people are showing up, more people are interested, and the content's maybe even more relevant, because I think what is changing now is the pressure that communicators are feeling, as we always feel during an economic downturn or a moment of challenge in the world, which is to prove our value, prove our worth. So over the last few months, I'm getting a lot of questions about teams, team capacity, and particularly how do I, if I'm on a communications team that's being cut or threatened, how do I defend the value of communications? How do I defend the value of the team? So I don't think I would change the model, but I would say that the emphasis or the pressure that people experience as they try to build their engine or strengthen their engine shifts to different things in uncertain times or moments of change.
Great. All right, now we've got 2 more questions. If folks have others, we still have a little bit more time together. So this next question is from Brianna, just sticking with this kind of moment. For organizations who are getting a lot of mindshare right now because of current events, what are some strategies to keep that going in a more evergreen way once current events pass or change, or as we know, people have a very limited attention span, so they may think about other things?
Yeah, I mean, I think in this moment, there is a really important reflection moment that you have to have as an organization about the appropriateness of your voice. Where is it appropriate for you to use your voice? If you're a racial justice organization, with a lot to say right now, your voice is hopefully out there and loud and people are listening to it, and your voice is still going to be relevant in the future. I'm seeing a lot of people in the last few months who are trying to insert their voice or insert their narrative in ways that maybe aren't appropriate. They don't really work in a space, or they really don't have anything new to say. They're just rehashing what other people are saying. So I think if you're saying something powerful right now and relevant right now, it's because you're a significant thought leader and a contributor, and that's gonna continue. There's always gonna be a place for that. Probably the difference is not what you talk about. The difference might be the level of attention that that you get as the external world shifts and has different moments of focus. But if you've got a clear strategy, if you are writing and speaking and producing things that are at the core of what your organization's voice is about, that should be evergreen. That should always be your go-to.
Yeah, I think too, this is where, you know, getting into technology, this is where doing things like welcome series or thinking about how do we communicate with new people who are coming to us, how do we keep building relationships, can come really very much into play. We've got a question here from Aaliyah. Again, thinking about leadership and culture, talking more about the role of leadership in creating a culture that supports communications. How can communications bridge the digital divide with leaders that are confused or intimidated by the digital landscape? How do you build support for digital efforts internally?
Yeah, Aaliyah, I'm delighted you are here tonight. And, you know, the digital divide is a really interesting topic because the digital divide, I think, is the byproduct of a couple of things. First of all, for people who've been working in nonprofit communications for maybe more than 15 years, people who were around 15 years ago kind of remember a pre-digital world, and they tend to describe communications in like digital or non-digital terms. For people who are newer to communications, people who've been in the field maybe in the last 10 years, that's a kind of an artificial divide. All communications these days are digital. It's kind of the fundamental way we communicate, no matter who you are and what you do. I think the piece that is really overwhelming for people is the tech piece. Like, I think that people are often, they don't know what open source is. They don't understand what SEO is. They don't understand, like, there's a lot of jargon and a lot of terms that we use that is actually emerging out of the digital space and out of the tech space. And that is exacerbated by the fact that nonprofits have, in my opinion, wisely moved the website out of the hands of the techie or the webmaster or the IT department and put it in the hands of communications. I think that's a great move because the communicators are the people who need to communicate. The website's a critical way we do that. But that means that the tech piece is a little harder for people to learn and to understand. And I think the best thing you can do with that is try to diffuse the scariness of the technology by finding partners and people and articles that don't lead with the tech, that lead with the outcomes and the objectives and can translate your organization's objectives into tech. So one example of this that we see a lot at Advomatic is communications people who are trying to choose WordPress or Drupal, but don't really understand technically the difference between those two systems. So you don't have to choose. Your ED doesn't have to choose. You just have to find somebody who asks you the right questions and takes you on the journey so that the answer of what's right for your organization becomes apparent. So yeah, that's my advice. We could talk more about that.
Well, I think that is officially all the questions we've gotten submitted. I know Anne is going to pop back on in a moment, but I just want to invite folks. You can feel free to connect. If you email hello@bigduck.com, that will make its way to me or Sarah. You can also email either our first names at bigduck.com. That will come to us. So if there is ever any questions you have about the engine, communications, branding, teams, getting your executive director to listen to you, whatever you need, we're here for you. Thank you, Chris, Brianna, Anne, and Joe for having us. We love you. We love N10. Thank you.
Yeah, and I want to say thank you to everybody from N10. A special shout out to Thomas, and Norman and Chris and Anne and Brianna and Joe. It feels so sad to have not been together in person at the NTC this year, and it's really nice to be here with you and see you all in this Zoom space. So thank you for inviting me.
Well, the feeling is mutual. Thank you, Sarah and Farrah, for sharing your wisdom. Do you have this on Audible? I would love to listen to this on a run.
I got to record it on Audible, and it's on my to-do list. Thank you for the nudge.
Thank you for honoring the request. I'll be looking out for that. And
I'm
Farrah,
on it. I'll do it.
I know you've got a link for everything, so you want to drop the link to the book once again here. Thank you for this amazing interactive Cliff Notes version that gets us excited. And taking a page from Sarah's book, we too will be sending out a survey to you all attending today, as well as our other members in 501 Tech, to get a sense of what future events would be helpful for you all in this very strange summer and fall looking ahead to this. So we'd love to hear from you. Just a quick 5-minute survey max to help us best make this most as useful as it can be for you. So we'll send that out in an email follow-up along with a recording.
Actually, for those who are on the Zoom call with us right now, when you hang up, your web browser will redirect you to that survey automatically. We've also added it to the chat room, so you can click on it and share your thoughts.
So again, a huge thank you to Sarah and Farrah. Also, I want to recommend downloading the ebooks that Farrah shared in the chat. I downloaded the strategy ebook and the building a team ebook, and they're both really great. Lots of really great content in there. As a project manager and a communicator, totally speaking my language, so highly recommend those. Be sure to find us on local.n10.org if you're not yet signed up, so that we can keep you in the loop on future events. Be sure to join our Facebook group if you're not yet part of it. Lots of great conversations on there. Find us at 501techNYC and keep the conversation going using hashtag 501techNYC. Stay tuned, and we hope to see you at the next event.